Okay, really quick update on chart density. I've kind of just played around with things, got my charts working, figured out kind of where contacts and notifications would go, and decided I don't really need those things right now. I'm just going to focus on data sets. We're using one of the Oracle Apex kind of native forms, master detail, parent child, and it's working really well. In fact, it's so much so that I pretty much ripped out all my code. I'm only using K2. I've got a view that is looking at stat bucket to generate this, and this is all working really well, and it's really easy to create. And kind of the light bulb moment that came on for me is that, when you generate this, it handles the inserts, updates, and deletes, and all that kind of stuff. So the more code I have layered on top of API or on an object, like say a data set, if in order to create a data set, if you need to call a procedure called create data set, this doesn't work really well because now you need to kind of point it all towards that procedure. And so I want to make sure that as I'm designing, everything works really easily from insert, update, and deletes on tables, and then the business logic or the application logic is implemented, at least initially, with triggers. That way, an interface like this can do the things it needs to do. So that was a little bit of a light bulb, and it's made me, where I have been calling things like k2 stat.create stat bucket, which is available. Why not think about the insert as your basic, your basic procedure? You just make it simple. Make sure that your inserts and your updates, well, your inserts should be fairly easy, and deletes should also have triggers that handle things and stuff like that, so that we reduce the amount of application logic in packages and maybe move some of that to triggers, or triggers calling packages. So anyway, I think that's going to make the interface really fast to develop. And then one of the kind of key things that I'm doing now is what I've got before me, I've ripped out a lot of the other stuff and just gone with this. Is like how fast could I recreate this? And I could do this, I could recreate this really roughly in a matter of minutes and then get all the little details done within an hour. And so if I can keep this that simple, where I'm not I want to use as much just native Apex UI stuff as possible, reduce as much code on the back end as possible, and make sure that inserts, updates, and deletes on tables have the associated triggers I need to do whatever I need to do. Then that's kind of a light bulb. Another thing I've done is I have been adding attribute columns, which is maybe a little bit outside the scope of this video, but generic attribute columns do have a place, especially when you're extending an object. So in this case, we have something called a data set, and we're using a stat bucket that's part of K2, but there might be attributes that we want to store that aren't part of the stat bucket. So we would have to create our own table and kind of keep those two in sync, which is perfectly okay. But if we add some generic attribute columns to the stat bucket table, then we can use those to store some of these other attributes in, and we can avoid having to create our own local table for now, at least. So I've done that with like SAS auth, the auth table. So you can store, let's say we create a default data set, and that default data set has an ID. Rather than having to keep a local copy of the users table and say, hey, here's the default ID, data set ID, or even having to use a stat bucket extra attribute to say this is the default bucket, quote, data set. We can just store that ID in the SAS auth, the user row, in one of its attributes, and know that, hey, the attribute 1 is the ID for the default data set. So that kind of makes things a little bit more flexible. So anyway, that's what I've got. Going to hopefully make some more progress and get another video out towards the end of the day today. Thanks.